Hello, this is Todd Booth, and I'll be your teacher. The course material is a book by the author William Stallings, and he actually created these slides. I'll just be presenting them. The course book is Network Security Essentials, Applications and Standards, 6th edition, hot off the press. And William Stallings is a fabulous author in computer science. He has numerous books and numerous awards for having the best books in computer science. And this book is fabulous. It's a little bit of a summary, so if you want to go into more depth, he has some other books which go into more depth with cryptography and other related subjects. In this chapter, we're going to have an overview of the subject matter within the book, and we're going to talk about the structure of the book. We're going to start with a general discussion of network security services and security mechanisms. And we're going to talk about the type of attacks they are designed for. Then we're going to have a general overview model within which the security services and mechanisms can be viewed. Computer security concepts. There's a lot of information on these slides, and I'm not going to read the slides word for word, so you should pause the recording now, read the slide, and then continue and listen to my presentation. And you should use the same technique on all slides. I assume you have read this slide. The requirements of information security within an organization have undergone two major changes in the last several decades. Before the widespread use of data processing equipment, the security of information felt to be valuable to an organization was provided primarily by physical and administrative means. So you couldn't just surf the internet or go through the network to get information. Without the computers and computer networks, it was more of a manual system. And an example of how you would protect information is you'd use these file cabinets, which are rugged, strong, and had good locks, and maybe you had security guards outside the room, and that's where information would be stored. An example of that information would be personnel screening procedures used in the hiring process. You might not want everyone knowing those. And then after the introduction of the computer, the need for automated tools for protecting files and other information, stored on the computers, of course, became evident. It took a while. In the beginning, there wasn't such great security for computers, but after a while, some hacks occurred, and then people started to think about security, and it's become more and more important ever since. So the security is very important for shared systems, such as time-sharing systems or other systems which are shared by multiple users in multiple different organizations. It's also very important for systems that can be accessed over a public telephone network, a data network, or the internet. And the focus of this book, of course, is, for example, network security, and we have a big emphasis on internet security. So the generic name for the collection of tools designed to protect data and thwart attackers is computer security. And again, that was the first major change, to go from file cabinets to computers. The second major change that affected security is the introduction of distributed systems and the use of networks and communication facilities for carrying data between terminal user and computer, and also between computers. Network security measures are needed to protect data during their transmission over the network. In fact, the term network security is somewhat misleading because virtually all businesses, governments, and academic organizations interconnect their data processing equipment with a collection of interconnected networks. Such a collection is often referred to as an internet with a lowercase, as opposed to the internet we know, which is a particular internet with an uppercase. And the term internet security is used. There are no clear boundaries between these two forms of security. For example, a computer virus may be introduced into a system physically when it arrives on a flash drive, or perhaps an optical disk, and then it may be loaded into the computer. However, viruses may also arrive over an internet. In either case, once the virus is resident on a computer system, internal computer security tools are needed to detect and recover from the virus. This book focuses on internet security, which consists of measures to deter, prevent, detect, and correct security violations that involve the transmission of information. The USA has an organization with the abbreviation of NIST, which stands for National Institute of Standards and Technology. Now, they have a computer security handbook, which defines computer security as follows. The protection afforded to an automated information system in order to attain the applicable objectives of preserving the integrity, availability, and confidentiality of information resources. And that's including hardware, software, firmware, information data, and telecommunications. Computer security objectives. This definition introduces three key objectives that are at the heart of computer security. Confidentiality. This term covers two related concepts. Data confidentiality assures that private or confidential information is not made available or disclosed to unauthorized individuals. Privacy assures that individuals control or influence what information related to them may be collected and stored, and by whom and to whom that information may be disclosed. Integrity. The term covers two related concepts. Data integrity assures that information and programs are changed only in a specific and authorized manner. System integrity assures that a system performs its intended function in an unimpaired manner, free from deliberate or inadvertent, unauthorized manipulation of the system. Availability assures that systems work promptly and service is not denied to authorized users. The CIA TRIAD. These three concepts form what is often referred to in computer security as the CIA TRIAD. The three concepts embody the fundamental security objectives for both data and for information and computing services. For example, the NIST Standards for Security Categorization of Federal Information and Information Systems, which is FIPS 199, lists confidentiality, integrity, and availability as the three security objectives for information and information systems. FIPS 199 provides a useful characterization of these three objectives in terms of requirements and the definition of a loss of security in each category. Confidentiality is preserving authorized restrictions on information access and disclosure, including means for protecting personal privacy and proprietary information. A loss of confidentiality is the unauthorized disclosure of information. Integrity, guarding against improper information modification or destruction, including ensuring information non-repudiation and authenticity. A loss of integrity is the unauthorized modification or destruction of information. Availability, ensuring timely and reliable access to and use of information. A loss of availability is the disruption of access to or use of information or an information system. There are some possible additional concepts that are helpful to keep in mind. Although the use of the CIA TRIAD to define security objectives is well established, some in the security field feel that additional concepts are needed to present a complete security picture. Two of the most commonly mentioned are as follows. Authenticity, which is the proper being genuine and being able to be verified and trusted. Confidence in the validity of a transmission, a message, or a computer-based message originator. This means verifying that users are who they say they are and that each input arriving at a system came from a trusted source. Accountability, the security goal that generates the requirement for actions of an entity to be traced uniquely to that entity. This supports non-repudiation, deterrence, fault isolation, intrusion detection and prevention, and after-action recovery, and it even helps with legal actions. Because truly secure systems are not yet an achievable goal, we must be able to trace a security breach to a responsible party. Systems must keep records of their activities to permit later forensic analysis to trace security breaches or to aid in transaction disputes. We can categorize breaches of security into different levels of impact from high to low. We use 3 levels of impact on organizations or individuals should there be a breach of security, i.e. a loss of confidentiality, integrity, and/or availability. And these 3 levels are defined in FIPS Pub 199, again from NIST. We have the low category. The loss could be expected to have a limited adverse effect on organizational operations, organizational assets, or individuals. A limited adverse effect means that, for example, the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability might perhaps cause a degradation in mission capability to an extent and duration that the organization is able to perform its primary functions, but the effectiveness of the functions is notably reduced. Another possibility would be that it results in minor damage to organizational assets and that it results in minor financial loss or results in minor harm to individuals. And again, that's all the low category. So let's move on over to the moderate. For the moderate, the loss could be expected to have a serious adverse effect on organizational operations, organizational assets, or individuals. A serious adverse effect means that, for example, the loss might cause a significant degradation in mission capability to an extent and duration that the organization is able to perform its primary functions, but the effectiveness of the functions is significantly reduced. And it may result in significant damage to organizational assets and result in significant financial loss, or perhaps result in significant harm to individuals that does not involve loss of life or serious life-threatening injuries. Hi. The loss could be expected to have a severe or catastrophic effect on the organization, operations, assets, or individuals. A severe or catastrophic adverse effect means that, for example, the loss might cause a severe degradation in or loss of mission capability to an extent and duration that the organization is not able to perform one or more of its primary functions. It could result in major damage to organizational assets. It could result in a major financial loss or result in severe or catastrophic harm to individuals. It may cause harm or loss of life to personnel. Here's some helpful examples of security requirements for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. For confidentiality, student grade information is an asset whose confidentiality is considered to be highly important by students. In the United States, the release of such information is regulated by the Family, Educational Rights, and Privacy Act. Grade information should only be available to students, their parents, and employees that require the information to do their job. Student enrollment information may have a moderate confidentiality rating. While still covered by the FERPA Act I mentioned, this information is seen by more people on a daily basis, is less likely to be targeted than grade information, and results in less damage if disclosed. Directory information, such as lists of students, faculty, or departmental lists, may be assigned a low confidentiality rating, or indeed no rating at all. This information is typically freely available to the public and published on the school's website. Integrity. Several aspects of integrity are illustrated by the examples of a hospital patient's allergy information stored in a database. The doctor should be able to trust that information is correct and current. Now suppose that an employee, for example a nurse, who is authorized to view and update this information deliberately falsifies the data to cause harm to the hospital. The database needs to be restored to a trusted basis quickly, and it should be possible to trace the error back to the person responsible. Patient allergy information is an example of an asset with a high requirement for integrity. Inaccurate information could result in serious harm or death to a patient and expose the hospital to a massive legal liability. An example of an asset that may be assigned a moderate level of integrity requirement is a website that offers a forum to registered users to discuss some specific topic. Either a registered user or a hacker could falsify some entries or deface the website. If the forum exists only for the enjoyment of the users, brings in little or no advertising revenue, and is not used for something important such as research, then potential damage is not severe. The webmaster may experience some data, financial, time loss. An example of a low integrity requirement is an anonymous online poll. Many websites, such as news organizations, offer these polls to their users with very few safeguards. However, the inaccuracy and unscientific nature of such polls are well understood. Availability. The more critical a component or service, the higher is the level of availability required. Consider a system that provides authentication services for critical systems, applications, and devices. An interruption of service results in the inability for customers to access computing resources and for the staff to access the resources they need to perform critical tasks. The loss of services translates into a large financial loss due to lost employee productivity and potential customer loss. An example that typically would be rated as having a moderate availability requirement is a public website for a university. The website provides information for current and prospective students and donors. Such a site is not a critical component of the university's information system, but its unavailability will cause some embarrassment. An online telephone directory lookup application would be classified as a low availability requirement. Although the temporary loss of the application may be an annoyance, there are other ways to access the information, such as a hard copy directory or an operator. Computer security challenges. Computer and network security is both fascinating, however it's complex. And some of the reasons include, 1, security is not as simple as it might first appear to the novice. The requirements seem to be straightforward indeed. Most of the time, major requirements for security services can be given self-explanatory one-word labels: confidentiality, authentication, non-repudiation, and integrity. But the mechanisms used to meet those requirements can be quite complex, and understanding them may involve rather subtle reasoning. In developing a particular security mechanism or algorithm, one must always consider potential attacks on those security features. In many cases, successful attacks are designed by looking at a problem in a completely different way, therefore exploiting an unexpected weakness in the mechanism. 3, because of the previous point, the procedures used to provide particular services are often counterintuitive. Typically, a security mechanism is complex, and it is not obvious from the statement of a particular requirement that such elaborate measures are needed. It is only when the various aspects of the threat are considered that elaborate security mechanisms make sense. 4. Having designed various security mechanisms, it is necessary to decide where to use them. This is true both in terms of physical placement, for example, at what points in a network are certain security mechanisms needed, and in a logical sense, for example, at what layer or layers of an architecture, such as TCP/IP, which is Transmission Control Protocol / Internet Protocol, should mechanisms be placed. 5. Security mechanisms typically involve more than a particular algorithm or protocol. They also require that participants be in possession of some secret information, for example, an encryption key, which raises questions about the creation, distribution, and protection of that secret information. There also may be a reliance on communications protocols whose behavior may complicate the task of developing the security mechanism. For example, if the proper functioning of the security mechanism requires setting time limits on the transit time of a message from the sender to receiver, then any protocol or network that introduces variable, unpredictable delays may render such time limits meaningless. And 6. Computer and network security is essentially a battle of the wits between a perpetrator who tries to find holes and the designer or administrator who tries to close them. The great advantage that the attacker has is that he or she need only find a single weakness, while the designer must find and eliminate all weaknesses to achieve perfect security. 7. There is a natural tendency on the part of users and system managers to perceive little benefit from security investment until a security failure occurs. 8. Security requires regular, even constant monitoring, and this is difficult in today's short-term overloaded environment. 9. Security is still too often an afterthought to be incorporated into a system after the design is complete, rather than being an integral part of the design process. 10. Many users and even security administrators view strong security as an impediment to efficient and user-friendly operation of an information system or use of information. The difficulties just enumerated will be encountered in numerous ways as we examine the various security threats and mechanisms throughout this book. OSI Security Architecture. To assess effectively the security needs of an organization and to evaluate and choose various security products and policies, the manager responsible for computer and network security needs some systematic ways of defining the requirements for security and characterizing the approaches to satisfy those requirements. This is difficult enough in a centralized data processing environment. With the use of local and wide area networks, the problems are compounded. ITU-T has a recommendation called X.800, Security Architecture for OSI, and it defines such a systematic approach. The OSI security architecture is useful to managers as a way of organizing the task of providing security. Furthermore, because this architecture was developed as an international standard, computer and communication vendors have developed security features for their products and services that relate to this structured definition of services and mechanisms. For our purposes, the OSI security architecture provides a useful, if abstract, overview of many of the concepts that this book deals with. The OSI security architecture focuses on security, attacks, mechanisms, and services. These can be defined briefly as security attack, any action that compromises the security of information owned by an organization. Security mechanism, a process or device incorporating such a process that is designed to detect, prevent, or recover from a security attack. Security service, a processing or communication service that enhances the security of the data processing systems and the information transfers of an organization. The services are intended to counter security attacks and they make use of one or more security mechanisms to provide the service. And we have a table for you about threats and attacks, and it's part of an RFC, request for comments. In the literature, the terms threat and attack are commonly used to mean more or less the same thing, and this table provides some definitions from that RFC. Security attacks. A useful means of classifying security attacks used both in X.800 and RFC 4949 is in terms of passive attacks and active attacks. A passive attack attempts to learn or make use of information from the system but does not affect system resources. An active attack attempts to alter system resources or affect their operation. Passive attacks, as shown in the figure, are in the nature of eavesdropping on or monitoring of transmissions. Active attacks, shown in the figure, involve some modification of the data stream or the creation of a false data stream. Passive attacks. The goal of the opponent is to obtain information that is being transmitted. Two types of passive attacks are the release of message contents and traffic analysis. The release of message contents is easily understood. A telephone conversation, an electronic mail message, a transferred file may contain sensitive or confidential information. We would like to prevent an opponent from learning the contents of these transmissions. A second type of passive attack, traffic analysis, is subtler. Suppose that we had a way of masking the contents of messages or other information traffic so that opponents, even if they captured the message, could not extract the information from the message. The common technique for masking contents is encryption. If we had encryption protection in place, an opponent might still be able to observe the pattern of these messages. The opponent could determine the location and identity of communicating hosts and could observe the frequency and length of messages being exchanged. This information might be useful in guessing the nature of the communication that was taking place. Passive attacks are very difficult to detect because they do not involve any alteration of the data. Typically, the message traffic is sent and received in an apparently normal fashion, and neither the sender nor receiver is aware that a third party has read the messages or observed the traffic pattern. However, it is feasible to prevent the success of these attacks, usually by means of encryption. Thus, the emphasis in dealing with passive attacks is on prevention rather than detection. Active attacks involve some modification of the data stream or the creation of a false stream and can be subdivided into 4 categories: masquerade, replay, modification of messages, and denial of service. A masquerade takes place when one entity pretends to be a different entity. A masquerade attack usually includes one of the following. For example, authentication sequences can be captured and replayed after a valid authentication sequence has taken place, thus enabling an authorized entity with few privileges to obtain extra privileges by impersonating an entity that has those privileges. Replay involves the passive capture of a data unit and its subsequent retransmission to produce an unauthorized effect. Modification of messages simply means that some portion of a legitimate message is altered, or that messages are delayed or reordered to produce an unauthorized effect. For example, a message meaning allow John Smith to read confidential file accounts is modified to mean allow Fred Brown to read confidential file accounts. The denial of service prevents or inhibits the normal use of management or communications facilities. This attack may have a specific target. For example, an entity may suppress all messages directed to a particular destination. For example, the Security Audit Service. Another form of service denial is disruption of an entire network, either by disabling the network or overloading it with messages so as to degrade performance. Active attacks present the opposite characteristics of passive attacks. Whereas passive attacks are difficult to detect, measures are available to prevent their success. On the other hand, it is quite difficult to prevent active attacks absolutely because of the wide variety of potential physical, software, and network vulnerabilities. Instead, the goal is to detect active attacks and to recover from any disruption or delays caused by them. If the detection has a deterrent effect, it may also contribute to prevention. Security services. X.800 defines a security service as a security that is provided by a protocol layer of communicating open systems and that ensures adequate security of the systems or of data transfers. Perhaps a clear definition is found in RFC 4949, which provides the following definition: a processing or communication service that is provided by a system to give a specific kind of protection to system resources. Security services implement security policies and are implemented by security mechanisms. X.800 divides these services into these 5 categories: authentication, access control, data confidentiality, data integrity, and non-repudiation. X.800 divides these services into 5 categories and 14 specific services. Be sure and pause the video and read this. Authentication. The authentication service is concerned with assuring that a communication is authentic. In the case of a single message, such as a warning or alarm signal, the function of the authentication service is to assure the recipient that the message is from the source that it claims to be from. In the case of an ongoing interaction, such as the connection of a terminal to a host, 2 aspects are involved. First, at the time of connection initiation, the service assures the 2 entities are authentic. That is, each of the identities reveals the identity to its peer, and both are authenticated as being correct and true. Second, the service must assure that the connection is not interfered with in such a way that a third party can masquerade as one of the 2 legitimate parties for the purposes of unauthorized transmission or reception. 2 specific authentication services are defined in X.800. Peer entity authentication provides for the collaboration of identity of a peer entity in an association. 2 entities are considered peers if they implement the same protocol in 2 different systems. For example, 2 TCP modules in 2 communicating systems. Peer entity authentication is provided for use at the establishment of, or at times during the data transfer phase of a connection. It attempts to provide confidence that an entity is not performing either a masquerade or an unauthorized replay of a previous connection. Data origin authentication provides for the corroboration of the source of a default data unit. It does not provide protection against the duplication or modification of data units. This type of service supports applications like electronic mail, where there are no prior interactions between the communicating entities. Access control.
In the context of network security, access control is the ability to limit and control the access to host systems and applications via communication links. To achieve this, each entity trying to gain access must first be identified or authenticated so that access rights can be tailored to the individual. Data confidentiality. This is the protection of transmitted data from passive attacks. With respect to the content of a data transmission, several levels of protection can be identified. The broadest service protects all user data transmitted between two users over a period of time. For example, when a TCP connection is set up between two systems, this broad protection prevents the release of any user data transmitted over the TCP connection. Narrower forms of this service can also be defined, including the protection of a single message or even specific fields within a message. These refinements are less useful than the broad approach and may even be more complex and expensive to implement. The other aspect of confidentiality is the protection of traffic flow from analysis. This requires that an attacker not be able to observe the source and destination, frequency, length, or other characteristics of the traffic on a communication facility. Data integrity. As with confidentiality, integrity can apply to a stream of messages, a single message, or selected fields within a message. Again, the most useful and straightforward approach is total stream protection. A connection-oriented integrity service, one that deals with a stream of messages, assures that messages are received as sent with no duplication, insertion, or modification, no reordering, and no replays. The destruction of data is also covered under this service. Thus, the connection-oriented integrity service addresses both message stream modification and denial of service. On the other hand, a connectionless integrity service, one that deals with individual messages without regard to any larger context, generally provides protection against message modification only. We can make a distinction between service with and without recovery. Because the integrity service relates to active attacks, we are concerned with detection rather than prevention. If a violation of integrity is detected, then the service may simply report this violation, and some other portion of the software or human intervention is required to recover from the violation. Alternatively, there are mechanisms available to recover from the loss of integrity of data, as we will review subsequently. The incorporation of automated recovery mechanisms is, in general, the more attractive alternative. Non-repudiation. This is what prevents either the sender or receiver from denying a transmitted message. Thus, when a message is sent, the receiver can prove that the alleged sender in fact sent the message. Similarly, when a message is received, the sender can prove that the alleged receiver in fact received the message. Availability service. Both X.800 and RFC 4949 define availability to be the property of a system or a system resource being accessible and usable upon demand by an authorized system entity according to performance specifications for the system. For example, a system is available if it provides services according to the system design whenever a user requests them. A variety of attacks can result in the loss of or reduction in availability. Some of these attacks are amendable to automated countermeasures, such as authentication and encryption, whereas others require some sort of physical action to prevent or recover from loss of availability of elements of a distributed system. X.800 treats availability as a property to be associated with various security services. However, it makes sense to call out specifically an availability service. An availability service is one that protects a system to ensure its availability. This service addresses the security concerns raised by denial of service attacks. It depends on proper management and control of system resources, and thus depends on access control service and other security services. So here's a table to help clarify some terms, so read through it, pause the video, and then resume. And the table lists security mechanisms defined in X.800. The mechanisms are divided into those that are implemented in a specific protocol layer, such as TCP, or an application layer protocol, and those that are not specific to any particular protocol layer or security service. These mechanisms will be covered in appropriate places in the book, so we do not elaborate now except to comment on the definition of encipherment. X.800 distinguishes between reverse encipherment mechanisms and irreversible encipherment mechanisms. A reversible encipherment mechanism is simply an encryption algorithm that allows data to be encrypted and subsequently decrypted. Irreversible encipherment mechanisms include hash algorithms and message authentication codes, which are used in digital signature and message authentication applications. So this table is based on one in X.800. It indicates the relationship between security services and security mechanisms. Fundamental security design principles. Despite years of research and development, it has not been possible to develop security design and implementation techniques that systematically exclude security flaws and prevent all unauthorized actions. In the absence of such foolproof techniques, it is useful to have a set of widely agreed design principles that can guide the development of protection mechanisms. The National Centers of Academic Excellence in Information Assurance/Cyber Defense, which is jointly sponsored by the U.S. National Security Agency and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, list the following as fundamental security design principles. Economy of mechanism, fail-safe defaults, complete mediation, open design, separation of privilege, least privilege, least common mechanism, psychological acceptability, isolation, encapsulation, modularity, layering, least astonishment. The first 8 listed principles were initially proposed in a research paper, SALT 75, and have withstood the test of time. Fundamental security design principles continued. Economy of mechanism means that the design of security measures embodied in both hardware and software should be as simple and small as possible. The motivation for this principle is that relatively simple, small design is easier to test and verify thoroughly. With a complex design, there are many more opportunities for an adversary to discover subtle weaknesses to exploit that may be difficult to spot ahead of time. The more complex the mechanism, the more likely it is to possess exploitable flaws. Simple mechanisms tend to have fewer exploitable flaws and require less maintenance. Further, because configuration management issues are simplified, updating or replacing a simple mechanism becomes a less intensive process. In practice, this is perhaps the most difficult principle to honor. There is a constant demand for new features in both hardware and software, complicating the security design task. The best that can be done is to keep this principle in mind during system design to try to eliminate unnecessary complexity. Fail-safe default means that access decisions should be based on permission rather than exclusion. That is, the default situation is lack of access, and the protection scheme identifies conditions under which access is permitted. This approach exhibits a better failure mode than the alternate approach, where the default is to permit access. A design or implementation mistake in a mechanism that gives explicit permission tends to fail by refusing permission, a safe situation that can be quickly detected. On the other hand, a design or implementation mistake in a mechanism that explicitly excludes access tends to fail by allowing access, a failure that may long go unnoticed in normal use. For example, most file access systems work on this principle, and virtually all protected services on client-server systems work this way. Complete mediation means that every access must be checked against the access control mechanism. Systems should not rely on access decisions retrieved from a cache. In a system designed to operate continuously, this principle requires that if access decisions are remembered for future use, careful consideration should be given on how changes in authority are propagated to such local memories. File access systems appear to provide an example of a system that complies with this principle. However, typically, once a user has opened a file, no check is made to see if permissions change. To fully implement complete mediation, every time a user reads a field or record in a file or a data item in a database, the system must exercise access control. This resource-intensive approach is rarely used. Open design means that the design of a security mechanism should be open rather than secret. For example, although encryption keys must be secret, encryption algorithms should be open to public scrutiny. The algorithms can then be reviewed by many experts, and users can therefore have high confidence in them. This is the philosophy behind the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, program of standardizing encryption and hash algorithms, and has led to the widespread adoption of NIST-approved algorithms. Separation of privilege is defined in the academic paper SALT 75 as a practice in which multiple privilege attributes are required to achieve access to a restricted resource. A good example of this is multi-factor user authentication, which requires the use of multiple techniques such as password and a smart card to authorize a user. The term is also now applied to any technique in which a program is divided into parts that are limited to the specific privileges they require in order to perform a specific task. This is used to mitigate the potential damage of computer security attacks. One example of this latter principle is the interpretation of removing high privilege operations to another process and running that process with higher privileges required to perform its task. Day-to-day interfaces are executed in a lower privileged process. Least privilege means that every process and every user of the system should operate using the least set of privileges necessary to perform the task. A good example of the use of this principle is role-based access control, which is described in Chapter 4. The system security policy can identify and define the various roles of users or processes. Each role is assigned only those permissions needed to perform its function. Each permission specifies a permitted access to a particular resource, such as read and write access to a specific file or a directory, connect access to a given host and port number, etc. Unless a permission is granted explicitly, the user or process should not be able to access the protected resource. More generally, any access control system should allow each user only the privilege that they need and they're authorized for. There is also a temporal aspect to the least privilege principle. For example, system programmers or administrators who have special privileges should have those privileges only when necessary. When they are doing ordinary activities, the privileges should be withdrawn. Leaving them in place just opens the door to accidents. Least common mechanism means that the design should minimize the functions shared by different users, providing mutual security. This principle helps reduce the number of unintended communication paths and reduces the amount of hardware and software on which all users depend, thus making it easier to verify if there are any undesirable security implementations. Psychological acceptability implies that the security mechanisms should not interfere unduly with the work of users, while at the same time meeting the needs of those who authorize access. If security mechanisms hinder the usability or accessibility of resources, then users may opt to turn off those mechanisms. Where possible, security mechanisms should be transparent to the user of the system, or at most introduced minimal obstruction. In addition to not being intrusive or burdensome, security procedures must reflect the user's mental model of protection. If the protection procedures do not make sense to the user, or if the user must translate his image of protection into a substantially different protocol, the user is likely to make errors. Isolation is a principle that applies in three contexts. First, public access systems should be isolated from critical resources, data processes, etc., to prevent disclosure or tampering. In cases where the sensitivity or criticality of the information is high, organizations may want to limit the number of systems on which that data is stored and isolate them, either physically or logically. Physical isolation may include ensuring that no physical connection exists between an organization's public access information resources and an organization's critical information. When implementing logical isolation solutions, layers of security services and mechanisms should be established between public systems and secure systems responsible for protecting critical resources. Second, the processes and files of individual users should be isolated from one another, except where it is explicitly desired. All modern operating systems provide facilities for such isolation, so that individual users have separate, isolated process space, memory space, and file space, with protections for preventing unauthorized access. Finally, security mechanisms should be isolated in the sense of preventing access to those mechanisms. For example, logical access control may provide a means of isolating cryptographic software from other parts of the host system, and for protecting cryptographic software from tampering and the keys from replacement or disclosure. Encapsulation can be viewed as a specific form of isolation based on object-oriented functionality. Protection is provided by encapsulating a collection of procedures and data objects in a domain of its own so that the internal structure of a data object is accessible only to the procedures of the protected subsystem, and the procedures may be called only at designated domain entry points. Modularity in the context of security refers both to the development of security functions as separate, protected modules and to the use of a modular architecture for mechanism design and implementation. With respect to the use of separate security modules, the design goal here is to provide common security functions and services such as cryptographic functions as common modules. For example, numerous protocols and applications make use of cryptographic functions. Rather than implementing such functions in each protocol or application, a more secure design is provided by developing a common cryptographic module that can be invoked by numerous protocols and applications. The design and implementation effort can then focus on the secure design and implementation of a single cryptographic module, and including mechanisms to protect the module from tampering. With respect to the use of a modular architecture, each security mechanism should be able to support migration to new technology or upgrade of new features without requiring an entire system redesign. The security design should be modular so that individual parts of the security design can be upgraded without the requirement to modify the entire system. Layering refers to the use of multiple overlapping protection approaches addressing the people, technology, and the operational aspects of information systems. By using multiple overlapping protection approaches, the failure of circumvention of any individual protection approach will not leave the system unprotected. We will see throughout this text that there is a layering approach which is often used to provide multiple barriers between an adversary and protected information or services. This technique is often referred to as defense in depth. Least astonishment means that a program or user interface should always respond in the way that is least likely to astonish the user. For example, the mechanism for authorization should be transparent enough to a user that the user has a good intuitive understanding of how the security goals map to the provided security mechanism. Attack surface. An attack surface consists of the reachable and exploitable vulnerabilities in a system. Examples of attack surfaces are the following: open ports on outward-facing web and other servers, and code listening on those ports. Services available on the inside of a firewall. Code that processes incoming data, email, XML, Office documents, and industry-specific custom data exchange formats. Interfaces, SQL, and web forms. An employee with access to sensitive information vulnerable to a social engineering attack. Attack surfaces can be categorized in the following ways. Network attack surface. This category refers to vulnerabilities over an enterprise network, wide area network, or the internet. Included in this category are network protocol vulnerabilities, such as those used for a denial of service attack, disruption of communication links, and various forms of intruder attacks. Software attack surface. This refers to vulnerabilities in application, utility, or operating system code. A particular focus in this category is web server software. Human attack surface. This category refers to vulnerabilities created by personnel or outsiders, such as social engineering, human error, and trusted insiders. An attack surface analysis is useful for addressing the scale and severity of threats to an information system. A systematic analysis of points of vulnerability makes developers and security analysts aware of where security mechanisms are required. Once an attack surface is defined, designers may be able to find ways to make the surface smaller, thus making the task of the adversary more difficult. The attack surface also provides guidance on setting priorities for testing, strengthening security measures, or modifying the service or application. On this slide, we see the use of layering or defense in depth and attack surface reduction, and we can see they complement each other in mitigating security risks. Attack trees. An attack tree is a branching, hierarchical data structure that represents a set of potential techniques for exploiting security vulnerabilities. The security incident, that is the goal of the attack, is represented as the root node of the tree. And the ways that an attacker could reach that goal are iteratively and incrementally represented as branches and subnodes of the tree. Each subnode defines a subgoal, and each subgoal may have its own set of further subgoals, etc. The final nodes are the paths outward from the root, that is, the leaf nodes, represent different ways to initiate an attack. Each node other than a leaf is either an AND node or an OR node. To achieve the goal represented by an AND node, the subgoals represented by all of that node's subnodes must be achieved. And for an OR node, at least one of the subgoals must be achieved. Branches can be labeled with values representing difficulty, cost, or other attack attributes, so that alternative attacks can be compared. The motivation for the use of attack trees is to effectively exploit the information available on attack patterns. Organizations such as CERT publish security advisories that have enabled the development of a body of knowledge about both general attack strategies and specific attack patterns. Security analysts can use the attack tree to document security attacks in a structured form that reveals key vulnerabilities. The attack tree can guide both the design of systems and applications and the choice and the strength of countermeasures. This figure is an example of an attack tree analysis for an internet banking authentication application. The root of the tree is the objective of the attacker, which is to compromise a user's account. The shaded boxes on the tree are the leaf nodes, which represent the events that compromise the attack. Note that in this tree, in this example, all the nodes other than the leaf nodes are OR nodes. The analysis to generate this tree considered the three components involved in authentication. User, terminal, and user. These attacks target the user equipment, including the tokens that may be involved, such as smart cards or other password generators, as well as the actions of the user. Communications channel. This type of attack focuses on communication links. Internet banking server. These type of attacks are offline attacks against the servers that host the internet banking application. 5 overall attack strategies can be identified, each of which exploits one or more of the 3 components. The 5 strategies are as follows. User credential compromise. This strategy can be used against many elements of the attack surface. There are procedural attacks, such as monitoring a user's action to observe a PIN or other credential, or theft of the user's token or handwritten notes. An adversary may also compromise token information using a variety of token attack tools, such as hacking the smart card or using a brute force approach to guess the PIN. Another possible strategy is to embed malicious software to compromise the user's login and password. An adversary may also attempt to obtain credential information via the communication channel, sniffing. Finally, an adversary may use various means to engage in communication with the target user, as shown in the figure. Injection of commands. In this type of attack, the attacker is able to intercept communication between the UT and the IBS. Various schemes can be used to be able to impersonate the valid user, which will allow them to gain access to the banking system. User credential guessing. It is reported that brute force attacks against some banking authentication schemes are feasible by sending random usernames and passwords. The attack mechanism is based on distributed zombie personal computers, hosting automated programs for username or password-based calculation. Security policy violation. For example, violating the bank security policy in combination with weak access control and logging mechanisms. An employee may cause an internal security incident and expose a customer's account. Use of known authenticated session. This type of attack persuades or forces the user to connect to the IBS with a preset session ID. Once the user authenticates to the server, the attacker may utilize the known session ID to send packets to the IBS, spoofing the user's identity. The figure provides a thorough view of the different types of attacks on an internet banking authentication application. Using this tree as a starting point, security analysts can assess the risk of each attack and, using the design principles outlined in the preceding section, design a comprehensive security facility. There are papers out there which are easy to find and referenced in the book which provide a good account of the results of this design effort. Trusted third party. A model for much of what we will be discussing is captured in very general terms in this figure. A message is to be transferred from one party to another across some sort of internet service. The two parties, who are the principals in this transaction, must cooperate for the exchange to take place. A logical information channel is established by defining a route through the internet from source to destination and by the cooperative use of communication protocols, for example, TCP/IP. And this is used between the two principals. Security aspects come into play when it is necessary or desirable to protect the information transmission from an opponent who may present a threat to confidentiality, authenticity, and so on. All of the techniques for providing security have two components. One, a security-related transformation on the information to be sent. Examples include the encryption of the message, which scrambles the message so that it is unreadable by the opponent, and the addition of a code based on the contents of the message, which can be used to verify the identity of the sender. 2. Some secret information shared by the two principals, and it is hoped, unknown to the opponent. An example is an encryption key used in conjunction with the transformation to scramble the message before transmission and unscramble it on reception. A trusted third party may be needed to achieve secure transmission. For example, a third party may be responsible for distributing the secret information to the two principals while keeping it from any opponent. Or a third party may be needed to arbitrate disputes between the two principals concerning the authenticity of a message transmission. This general model shows that there are 4 basic tasks in designing a particular security service. 1. Design an algorithm for performing the security-related transformation. The algorithm should be such that an opponent cannot defeat its purpose. 2. Generate the secret information to be used with the algorithm. 3. Develop methods for the distribution and sharing of the secret information. 4. Specify a protocol to be used by the two principals that make the use of the security algorithm and the secret information to achieve a particular security service. Parts 1 and 2 of this book concentrate on the types of security mechanisms and services that fit into the model shown in the figure. However, there are other security-related situations of interest that do not neatly fit this model, but are considered in this book. A general model of these other situations is illustrated by Figure 1.6, which reflects a concern for protecting an information system from unwanted access. Most readers are familiar with the concerns caused by the existence of hackers who attempt to penetrate systems that can be accessed over a network. The hacker can be someone who, with no malign intent, simply gets satisfaction from breaking and entering a computer system. The intruder can be a disgruntled employee who wishes to do damage, or a criminal who seeks to exploit computer assets for financial gain. For example, obtaining credit card numbers or performing illegal money transfers. Unwanted access. Another type of unwanted access is the placement in a computer system of logic that exploits vulnerabilities in the system and that can affect application programs as well as utility programs such as editors and compilers. Programs can present two kinds of threats. One, information access threats, intercept or modify data on behalf of users who should not have access to that data. Two, service threats, exploit service flaws in computers to inhibit use by legitimate users. Viruses and worms are two examples of software attacks. Such attacks can be introduced into a system by means of a disk that contains the unwanted logic concealed in otherwise useful software. They can also be inserted into a system across a network. This latter mechanism is of more concern in network security. The security mechanisms needed to cope with unwanted access fall into two broad categories, as shown in Figure 1.6. The first category might be termed a gatekeeper function. It includes password-based login procedures that are designed to deny all access except to authorized users, and screening logic that is designed to detect or reject worms, viruses, and other similar attacks. Once either an unwanted user or unwanted software gains access, the second line of defense consists of a variety of internal controls that monitor activity and analyze stored information in an attempt to detect the presence of unwanted intruders. These issues are explored in the course book, Part 3. Standards. Many of the security techniques and applications described in this book have been specified as standards. Additionally, standards have been developed to cover management practices and the overall architecture of security mechanisms and services. Throughout this book, we describe the most important standards in use or being developed for various aspects of cryptography and network security. Various organizations have been involved in the development or promotion of these standards. The most important, in the current context, of these organizations are as follows. National Institute of Standards and Technology. NIST is a U.S. federal agency that deals with measurement science, standards, and technology related to the U.S. government use and to the promotion of U.S. private sector innovation. Despite its national scope, NIST Federal Information Processing Standards, FIPS, and Special Publications, SP, have a worldwide impact. Internet Society, ISOC, is a professional membership society with worldwide organizational and individual membership. It provides leadership in addressing issues that confront the future of the Internet and is the organization home for the groups responsible for the Internet infrastructure standards, including the Internet Engineering Task Force, IETF, and the Internet Architecture Board, IAB. These organizations develop Internet standards and related specifications, all of which are published as requests for comments. A more detailed discussion of these organizations is contained in the book's appendix. Okay, well, we made it to the last slide. So here's a summary. We talked about computer security concepts, the OSI security architecture, security attacks, the model for network security, standards, security services, security mechanisms. And then we talked about attack surfaces and attack trees on how we can modify and document our overview of the whole attack process. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you listen to the next chapter soon. Bye for now.